Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, the Cleveland Browns have once again travelled to Pittsburgh and got beaten. This is the 22nd, 23rd consecutive time that the Cleveland Browns have lost in the regular season in Pittsburgh. It's just becoming painful at this point. It's painful every time. But at 22 or 23 or whatever it is, it's just beyond a joke at this point. It feels like we're never, ever going to win in Pittsburgh. I once again go another year as a Cleveland Browns fan without ever seeing my team win in Pittsburgh yet. So maybe next year. But got to obviously talk about the game. An absolutely pathetic performance all round, shall we say. Not so much on the defense, but a pathetic performance from the Browns overall. Give my thoughts on the game, and then obviously talk about the bigger picture stuff going forward as well. But starting with the game, obviously very disappointing. Once again, Cleveland Browns can't score more than 17 points. They couldn't even score more than 10 points today. They couldn't even score a touchdown today. Awful offensive football we're just kind of used to seeing at this point. We say every week, is it going to change? We don't really expect it to change, and then we act surprised when it doesn't change. But once again, awful offensive football from the Browns. Special teams just a mess again as well. Would have been even worse if it wasn't for a couple of penalties. And the defense, don't get me wrong, definitely the better unit of the day, as they are pretty much every week, but they weren't great by any means either. The Steelers weren't exactly amazing in this game, but they were able to do enough and win the game quite comfortably. A lot of the things that we spoke about in the preview, so some of the stuff that the Browns would have had to do to have a chance, they were unable to do. They were unable to get the run game going. Just 65 yards for the team today. Quinshawn only 36 yards on 12 carries. Jerome Ford, actually the best running back on the day with just 2 carries, but 17 yards, had the longest rush for 12 yards. And then Dylan Sampson, 3 carries for 12 yards. They were unable to get their run game going at all, whereas the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to get their run game going. 100 yards from them today. Caleb Johnson, 15 yards. So again, I'm still unable to get over about 30 yards on the season. But Kenneth Gainwell only chipped in with 22 as well. Jalen Warren, 52. So no one screamed out, for them today. But Jalen Warren was solid. Was able to pick up quite a few first downs for them. It seemed like in a couple drives in this game, the Browns' run defense kind of got worn down, and the Steelers were able to pick up pretty easy yards in their run game in this game. And then DK Metcalf, we spoke about him, pretty much being their only receiving threat this year. If you were able to do a good job on him, then you'd have had a good chance in this game. Tyson Campbell, you've got to give him some credit. This is a guy that played on Monday, came in, via a trade. Was already inserted straight away into the starting lineup. And I tweeted as a joke during the week that, I think it was in response to some Steelers report, some Steelers account talking about the Greg Newsome trade, and I said, fuck it, put Tyson Campbell on DK Metcalf all game, as I said, as a joke. They weren't far off doing that. Tyson Campbell certainly got a fair share. Got left on an island a lot with DK Metcalf in this game, and to be honest, he actually did a fairly solid job, other than obviously the one touchdown that he gave up, which of course was the biggest play, was a big touchdown. That's what made his day looked a lot better. Just 4 receptions for 95 yards, and that touchdown, which was a 25-yard touchdown, I believe. But he had 9 targets on the day. As I said, just 4 receptions. I do think Tyson Campbell was solid enough against DK Metcalf, who, DK Metcalf is a very hard wide receiver to go up against, especially going up against in the Browns scheme. Man on man, you get left alone with these guys a lot. So as I said, to come in on your first, you just come in by a trade. You played on Monday, very quick turnaround. You've only had a couple of practices, and you get, quite a lot put on your plate straight away. As I said, outside of the touchdown, I do think that Tyson Campbell actually, had a decent day. Other than that, Denzel Ward, when he was on DK Metcalf, pretty much completely locked him up, which, does make you think maybe you should have had Denzel on him, a few more times. But hindsight is always 20/20, and damned if you do, damned if you don't. Greg Newsome, of course, we all saw on social media. He gave up a 60-plus yard touchdown today against Seattle. So everyone was obviously making the jokes, and then obviously when Tyson Campbell gave up the touchdown, it was like, right, yeah, that's a wash. Then we can't make those jokes anymore. But as I said, I do think that Tyson Campbell, outside of that obviously touchdown that he gave up, which of course you can't ignore that is a touchdown that he gave up at a fairly pivotal point in this game. But outside of that, I do think he was solid. But as I said, going into this game, DJ Metcalf was their main receiving threat. Could you do a good job on him? They were unable to fully contain him, and he obviously got the touchdown and led the Steelers in receiving. We also spoke about the tight ends. The Browns, even with as good as their defense has been the last few years, they've struggled against tight ends, especially against the Steelers. I mean, Pat Freiermuth has really hurt the Browns the last few years. But this year, through 5 weeks to start the season, they were playing much better against tight ends. I think only allowing 30 yards a game to tight ends. You look on the flip side, the Steelers weren't really doing much with their tight ends. Their leading receiver in that tight end room going into this game was Jonnu Smith with just 70 yards on the season. So spoke about that, and obviously how if the Browns can keep that going, and the Steelers tight ends will continue not being able to get the production that they probably hope from those guys, and again the Browns would have a chance in this game. And the Browns showed that either the Steelers tight ends just really were going through a bit of a bad slump, and now have obviously got their season kind of kick-started, or that the Browns, first 5 weeks of improved defense against other teams' tight ends was just a bit short-lived, because Darnell Washington, the first play of the game, Darnell Washington breaks for, I think, 32 yards or whatever it was, with a pretty nice play call from the Steelers. That fate, everyone in the stadium thought they were running the ball, and they ended up lobbing it over the top to Darnell Washington. He finished the game with 62 yards. Jonnu Smith with 18 yards. Pat Freiermuth with one catch for 11 yards. So, nearly 100 yards from their tight ends today. So, it just felt like everything that we spoke about in the preview, that, as I said, the Browns would have to do well to have a chance in this game, and the things that they would have to limit for the Steelers just basically happened the opposite way round, and the Browns weren't able to do those things. Another thing as well, obviously, if the Browns' defensive line were going to be able to put Aaron Rodgers under duress going into this game, he led the NFL in time to throw. He got the ball out quicker than anyone in the NFL, about 2.1 seconds. And you look at this game, Dylan Gabriel was sacked 6 times, and Aaron Rodgers was sacked 0 times. The Browns were unable to put Aaron Rodgers under much duress. And a lot of that was because of just how quickly they get the ball out. A lot of people will talk about Miles in this game. Even I will make in the end of the day, when you're going to poke the bear in the, before, leading up to the game, if you're going to make a post like Miles made, kind of poking fun at the Steelers, then you would obviously like to see them live up to it and have more than one or two tackles that he had in this game. 0 sacks, 0 tackles for loss. But in the end of the day, when the other team is basically running play action away from you every single snap, they're getting the ball out in less than 2 seconds. It is quite hard to be able to affect the game. Obviously, I'll have to see what the pressure numbers and stuff like that are from Miles in this game. But as I said, they get the ball out so quick. There's not many quarterbacks in the NFL better at doing that than Aaron Rodgers. So it is hard to play against when they do that. But even with that being said, the Browns' defensive line was still unable to get as much pressure as you would have liked in this game. to put Aaron Rodgers under duress. As a 40-year-old quarterback, if you could have got to him a few times, put him under duress, then hopefully this would have gone a lot differently, and their offense wouldn't have been able to run as well as it did. The first half, the defense did pretty well, but they were preventing scores, they were preventing touchdowns, and they got off the field a couple of times, but they were still giving up some drives. And obviously that's what led to the 3 field goals. And in the second half, giving up the 2 touchdowns that weren't really great as well to give up. So basically everything that we spoke about that the Browns would have to do, they didn't do. They weren't able to protect Dillon Gabriel. He was sacked 6 times in this game. They weren't able to get their run game going in this game. Only 65 yards for the whole team, just 36 yards on 12 carries for Quinshon today. And their defense were unable to put Aaron Rodgers under duress, and they were unable to completely stifle that Pittsburgh run attack, which obviously that play action and quick game relies so much on. So that's pretty much the reasons they lost this game. And on offense, why was Dillon sacked 6 times? Because I don't really think, I can't recall any of them really being, I think maybe one where he kind of ran into the collapsed pocket, but other than that, I mean, the Browns offensive line at this point, we're talking about it every single week. It is just beyond laughable at this point. I mean, I don't think any team has had a worse tackle situation over the last 2 years in the NFL than the Cleveland Browns. Jack Conklin once again going out injured in this game. KT Leverson having to come in. He just is not an NFL tackle. He cannot play tackle in the NFL. Even Cam Robinson getting hurt. I mean, he was bad in this game. I said about it when they made the trade that Cam Robinson wasn't good and that I'm not expecting much from him, but hopefully he can be better than what the awful tackle play we had obviously leading up to that. And, so even with that being said, even with me thinking he was going to be bad, I'm still surprised by how bad he has been. I mean, to be a 8-9 year vet, be giving up some of the penalties that he's been giving up, not great at all. As I said, the Browns tackle situation is just so damaging to this team. And it does get to a point where you think, I mean, in this game with Dillon Gabriel, a lot of people, of course, with Shedeur Sanders being the backup, it's obviously naturally that everyone's going to be calling for Shedeur Sanders. We've already seen that throughout this game. But I personally don't think, I just don't see how you can blame Dillon in any single way for this game. I mean, first and foremost, he's a rookie making his second start that's being asked to throw the ball 52 fucking times. He's playing behind an offensive line that cannot block, and his receivers cannot catch the ball. I mean, the amount of drops in this game, Jerry Jeudy early on especially, just pathetic. I mean, he had that one sequence where he gave up the 15-yard penalty on unnecessary roughness after the play, and then dropped the dropped the ball in the very next play. His nightmare season seems to continue. Harold Fanning had a really bad drop in this game, a couple of drops, I think. And going back to the O-line and obviously how bad it is, and obviously with Dillon, I mean, at what point, how do you evaluate someone when their offensive line is genuinely just as bad as the Browns is? If they're not giving up penalties, they're just letting guys blow straight past them. It is just that bad. So as I said, it's hard to evaluate a guy when his offensive line just can't block and his receivers can't catch. I don't think how you can come away from this game in any way and blame Dillon Gabriel for this loss, or even say that he was, terrible in this game. When he was given time to throw the ball, his receivers were dropping it. I'm not saying that he was perfect in every time that he got a clean pocket in this game by any means. Yes, there's a lot of checkdowns, etc. But how much of that is, as I said, you just have no time to throw the ball. Your receivers, when they do get open and you do get time to throw the ball, they're dropping the ball. So I just, I don't think there's any way that you can come away from this game screaming that Dillon Gabriel needs to be benched, and that he's basically been given as much of a chance that you can give him, and that's it. He's played 8 quarters of football. 4 of them were against a Brian Flores defence in an international game in his first ever start. And the second was going up against a Mike Tomlin team coming off of a bye. 8-0 in their last 8 games coming off of byes. The Browns haven't won in Pittsburgh for 22 years going into this game. He's got the third best record against rookie quarterbacks in NFL history. His offensive line is basically guys that they've just basically got off the street every single week. His wide receivers can't catch the ball, and we're going to come away from this game and go, yep, Dylan Gabriel's the problem. I think that's just absolutely ridiculous. This is not. I'm not saying this because I have some kind of anti-Shedeur Sanders bias by any means. You can go. It's well documented, in my opinion, on both of these guys. Have nothing against any of these guys. I want both of these guys to succeed. But it's unfair, in my opinion, to say that Dylan Gabriel's had enough of a chance after 2 games. I said when they made the move to Dylan that he deserves to at least get 5 or 6 games, just with how bad everything is around him, just to see what you could get out of it. And I expect that to be the case going forward. But as I said with this game, just a pathetic performance from the offense. Can't score over 10 points in this game, let alone getting close to 17 points. The defense, they don't get helped at all. It's, again, I said it's hard to evaluate a quarterback when their offensive line can't block and their wide receivers and all receivers can't catch the ball. It's also kind of hard to fully evaluate a defense when they just get put in so many tough spots because their offense and special teams are that bad. This is like the perfect kind of defense to have on a good team that has a good offense, just because of obviously when if you're going up against a high-powered offense and you're having to, you might be getting into a shootout and you might think, you have to be more pass-heavy, then that just opens up so much for this defense and what they like to do and how aggressive they are. But unfortunately, they've got a defense that can't get first downs, let alone complete 20 yards down the field. So it is kind of hard to evaluate the defense. But, even with that being said, in this game, there were points where, they did give up plays. The run defense, that was the number 1 run defense in the NFL, had some pretty bad spots in this game, and the defensive line was unable to get, much pressure, and of course wasn't able to create any sacks or create any plays to, disrupt that Steelers offense. So just bad all round. And as I said with the special teams, at this point I don't even know what to say. I said all off season I couldn't understand how Bubba Ventrone still had a job, and I still don't understand how now he still has a job. The special teams just continue to regress each year, each week under Bubba Ventrone. It's just awful, and I don't understand how he still has a job. But that's the game, just bad, pure bad. Any good takeaways from the game? Harold Fanning getting some garbage yards at the end, taking him up to 80 yards on 7 receptions. That'll look good on his stat sheet, I suppose. Gage Laverdale had a couple plays in this game. Good to see him out there, but he did get injured in this game. There was actually quite a few injuries, actually. So, the very limited chance I had there to talk about anything good immediately reminded me of the bad stuff as well. So, obviously, David Njoku got pretty banged up in this game. He went to the sideline a few times and eventually came out towards the end in the 4th quarter of this game. Not entirely sure what the injury was, but he did look like he was pretty hurt and banged up out there. I mentioned Gage Laverdale. He came out with a head injury. Someone else came out with a concussion in this game. I can't remember who. Someone might have to remind me on that. But not great all round from the Browns in this game, of course. Just a pathetic performance as we've seen each week. But going on to obviously the bigger picture, because obviously the biggest probably storylines coming out of this game is going to be the whole fire the coach, fire everyone kind of stuff. And at this point, I said it last week, I've been a Stefanski guy, but at this point I don't even bother defending him. If you want him fired, I think that's absolutely more than reasonable. And even for me saying that, it gets to a point where I think that there's so many things that aren't his fault. We all want to give credit to Andrew Berry for the for the draft class this year, for the rookie class, which rightfully so. But the reason the Browns' offensive line is in the state that it is because Andrew Berry has not invested in it. The reason that the Browns' wide receivers are as bad as they are is because of how bad that Andrew Berry has been in bringing in wide receivers, not via trade. Obviously, he's been pretty good at doing it via trade. I say that Judy obviously is slightly damaging that thought, but a lot of the stuff around and why this team is so bad is not his fault. But again, it gets to a point where even with all of that being said, to go this amount of time with the offense being this pathetic, to go this amount of time without being able to score more than 17 points. We've seen backup quarterbacks on bad offenses around the league being able to score 20 points in games. And Kevin Stefanski, as I said, so many things that aren't his fault that's wrong with this team, i.e. the offensive line, the lack of investment there, how bad the wide receiver core is, etc., etc. Not having a quarterback. I don't think any of us here believe that Kevin Stefanski was the one that advocated for Deshaun Watson. But again, as I said, it gets to a point where you can't justify being this inept on offense when you are an offensive head coach. So, don't get me wrong. If the I'm fully convinced that if the Browns fired him, he would go and be great somewhere else. I'm convinced of that. But it does get to a point, as I said, where I don't even bother defending it anymore. I don't think that a change of scenery at the head coach position is going to be the worst thing ever for this team, because in the end of the day, how worse can it get? While on the flip side, I don't think it's, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you bring in. If your offensive line is as bad as the Browns' offensive line is, if your receiver core is as bad as the Browns is, if you don't have a quarterback like the Cleveland Browns, it doesn't matter who the fucking head coach is, you are going to be bad. So I have to obviously recognise that, while on the other side recognise that, well, maybe, yes, it can't get better in that sense, but also it can't get any worse with bringing in a fresh face kind of thing. So I'm kind of just neutral on it at this point. I don't think that a lot of the problems that the Browns have are entirely the fault of Kevin Stefanski, but I do think it gets to a point where, you just can't, it's inexcusable going this amount of games and looking this awful on offense when you are an offensive-minded head coach. So, as I said, at this point, I don't even really have an argument either way. I just don't even care at this point. I think it's been that bad, but I do also think that you can't just blame him for obviously the thingy thing. If you want to give credit for Andrew Berry for the draft class, etc., you do have to recognise the lack of investment he's put in other areas. I've been screaming for investment in this offensive line through the draft the last couple of years, and we've not had it. And we're seeing the results from that. I mean, the offensive line, as I said earlier, it is one of, I don't think any team in the NFL has had a worse offensive line situation than the Cleveland Browns have had in the last 2 years. We are starting different offensive line combinations every single week. We're having to drag guys off the street, off of practice squads every single week, different guys to start at left tackle, at right tackle, or whatever. It's just so bad. At this point, quarterback is always going to be the biggest need when you don't have one, but at this point, left tackle is arguably only just below quarterback in terms of the Browns' biggest needs, because it is just insane how badly this Browns need to shore up, the offensive line as a whole, but especially that tackle position. We went into this year with a lot of questions. None of those questions have been answered. They've only been made into bigger questions. It's just an absolute mess all round. So, as I said, bigger picture, are there going to be changes at this point? I don't even think you can say that it's unlikely. I think it is getting to a point where it might become untenable, and it gets that bad. We'll have to wait and see. The Browns continue to just be shit, awful, an absolute pain to watch on offense and on special teams as well. You can't even blame the defense in these coming weeks for giving up themselves, because, as I've said the last couple of weeks, when your offense and special teams are playing against you, at what point do you say, well, what is the point? So obviously we'll have to see what happens going forward. Do the Browns obviously trade more players? Do they start punting on the season now they are 1-5? We'll have to wait and see. But as I always try and clutch at straws and try and find some positives to take out each week, and just to just for my own mental sake, so I don't feel that miserable every single time I watch the Cleveland Browns. The Jacksonville Jaguars did lose today against the Seattle team that was pretty undermanned. I mean, they were pretty much missing their entire secondary in this game, and they were able to beat Jacksonville in that game. So Jacksonville go to 4-2. Every time that they lose is a win for the Cleveland Browns, of course. So obviously happy that that happens. And finally, I mean, look, the Browns are 1-5. It's awful. When your team is 1-5, it's shit. It's especially even worse when you're playing bad football in that period as well. But at the end of the day, I think when the Browns' schedule came out, we all looked at these first 6 games. I think best case scenario for most people was 2-4. That was probably what most people were saying. So, yes, it sucks, and we're sat here at 1-5. But in the end of the day, are we that surprised that the Cleveland Browns are sat here at 1-5? They basically told us that this was a rebuild year going into the year. They've got through it terribly at 1-5. You could argue they should be 3-3 in this 6-game stretch. Was the games that they should have won, obviously Cincinnati and last week against the Vikings. So, yes, it's terrible. It's gotten to the point where, even me as a Kevin Stefanski defender in recent years has got to the point where I'm like, at this point, I'm not even going to argue, against firing him. So it has gotten that bad. But in the end of the day, as I said, how many of us thought it wasn't going to be pretty bad after these first 6 games anyway? The schedule does get easier going forward. If they have any skin, if this coaching staff has any shred of respect for themselves, shall we say, if they have any intention of wanting to keep their job, if this rookie class wants to continue to impress and show why they might be a big part of the Browns' future going forward, and hopefully the class that turns this franchise around, and etc., and all the veterans that hopefully want to be here to do that. That's what they'll have to show over these next few games as we go into a slightly more easier schedule. I mean, I say that Miami did actually put up like 27 points today, but they did lose. So I think they're 1-5 as well. So the Browns have got Miami, they've got the Patriots coming up, they've got the Jets coming up, they've got some easier games. Let's see how they can do over the next few games. They're not. I mean, I say they're not going to sack a coach before the bye week, but we have seen quite a few coaches sacked after Pittsburgh losses, over the last decade. So who knows at the end of the day? And at this point, I don't think you can really say that anything is a guarantee in regards to any of these coaches' jobs. But let's see what they can do over these next few games as a response to obviously starting the season 1-5. But that's all I suppose we can. That's all I can really say at this point. It's painful. It gets to a point where you just think, what is the point of even watching this every week? But I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. I hate putting myself through it, but I love putting myself through it at the same time. It makes the few wins feel all the better at the same. But let me know what you guys thought of this game. Were you as annoyed watching this as I was? I know the answer to that. You all were. What do you guys think is the biggest problem? Is it the coach? Is it the quarterback? Is it the O-line? Is it the whole team? Let me know what you guys think. But that would do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Putting yourself through the Cleveland Browns is hard enough, let alone putting yourself through a British guy talking about it. So I do appreciate anyone that's made it all the way through. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Enjoy this week as much as you can after a terrible loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh for the 23rd fucking time, whatever it is. I get sick of even being told at this point. But enjoy it as much as you can. And most importantly, as much as we all hate to say it, go Browns.